The Mark. Segment 10, Part 5, The Parable of the Unjust Steward. This parable is about a man who fails, and the direction in which he turns when he fails. It follows on the general parable of the prodigal son, where a man is shown as coming to himself and returning, but this return is represented only in principle. The prodigal son awakens and returns, and he is seen from afar by his father and welcomed. But nothing is said of the difficulties of the way back. It depicts only success and rejoicing at the recovery of what was lost and the coming to life again of what was dead. But the parable of the unjust steward is about a man who fails but who acts in a way that is commended. This parable is always regarded as the most complicated and confusing parable in the Gospels. It is related as follows. There was a certain rich man that had a steward, and the same was accused unto him that he had wasted his goods. And he called him and said to him, How is it that I hear this of thee? Give an account of thy stewardship, for thou mayest be no longer steward. Then the steward said within himself, What shall I do? For my Lord takes away from me the stewardship. I can't dig. To beg I'm ashamed. I am resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of the Lord's debtors unto him, and said unto the first, How much owest thou unto my Lord? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said unto him, Take thy bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. Then said he to another, And how much owest thou? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said unto him, Take thy bill, and write 80. And the Lord commended the unjust steward, because he had done wisely. For the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. And I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. If therefore ye have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if ye have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve Elohim and Mammon. Luke 16, 1-13 AV. As can be seen from the comments made by Messiah, this parable is about the true riches and what is one's own, which are being contrasted with the mammon of unrighteousness and what belongs to another. If therefore ye have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? Messiah says in his comments, And if ye have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? Unlike the parable of the prodigal son, this parable, as already said, is about a failure and how it can be faced. The unjust steward has failed in regard to his rich lord, but he thinks of a remarkable plan, which he carries out and is commended by his Lord and by Messiah. And his Lord commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely. For the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. And I say unto you, make yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. The steward had failed. In what respect? By interpretation, he had failed as steward of the true riches. But the parable and its interpretation concern a man who, under the circumstances, retrieves himself. The parable does not directly say that as a consequence he could eventually become again a steward of the true riches. But in the comments made about it, it seems probable. Messiah says that unless a man is faithful in the least, he cannot be faithful in much. In the least, an elekeisto is the mammon of unrighteousness. Compared with the true riches, the mammon of unrighteousness and its truth are the least. But unless a man can be faithful to the mammon of unrighteousness, he cannot expect to have the true riches and what is his own. Only note the word faithful, pistis, which connects with the whole meaning of faith in the Gospels. Of this word and its meaning we have spoken earlier, but faith does not mean mere practical efficiency, and the parable is not about this. Faith implies, even in quite an ordinary worldly sense, trust and belief beyond what is self-evident. A man in ordinary life is called faithful, usually in connection with being tempted. That is, tempted to believe no longer in what he is doing and so not holding to his trust. And so by a faithful steward, people understand one who continues to give his service under difficult circumstances or even against his own interests. The steward is called wise, and the Greek word used here, phronimos, is very important to understand. It means having presence of mind, being practical in discernment, and quick and intelligent action. The parable of the 10 virgins in Matthew 25, 5 virgins were phronimoi, translated wise, and 5 were morai, whence the modern word moron is derived, meaning idiotic or imbecile. The word phronimos appears many times in the Gospels, always with an essential, important meaning. In Matthew 24 is an allusion to a steward who must always be on the watch in case his house is broken into and robbed. Who then is the faithful pistis and wise phronimos servant, whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household? The Greek word sophos, also translated in the Gospels as wise, has quite another meaning, as when Yeshua says, I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because thou hast hidden these things from the wise, the aposophon, and prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes. Luke 10:21. Wise here is sophos in the Greek, and it is clearly used in a bad sense, though it is translated in this misleading way. Phronimos is obviously used in the Gospels in a special way and refers to a quality that people must have who wish to follow Messiah, as is evident in the parable of the man who built his house on the rock and the man who built it on the sand, where Messiah says, Whosoever heareth these things of mine and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise phronimos man, which built his house upon a rock, and the rain descended, and the floods came, and it fell not. Matthew 12:24. Here, wise is phronimos. From all this, and from the other examples which could be quoted, it's obvious that since the steward was called phronimos, it meant something technically of great importance in this language used by Messiah, and points to a high quality in the steward that manifests itself at the right moment in the right way. The steward acted in a consciously intelligent way, or in a conscious way. The commentators usually say merely that the word means prudent, but it means more than this. The steward is called wise directly, and he is also called indirectly in the comments faithful. These two defining terms cannot be disconnected. The steward in what he does is not only intelligent but faithful. Faithful in what? This is shown in the words, He that is faithful in the least is also faithful in much. The steward was faithful in what he finally did in the least, that is, towards the mammon of unrighteousness. He had to turn away from his stewardship of the true riches, and without complaining, he turned to the world. Instead of being the steward of the righteous world, that is, the kingdom of heaven, he became a faithful steward of the unrighteous world, the world of mammon, the world we all live in, with its truth, its ideas, its values, concepts, knowledge, science, and so on. For this reason, after his action, which is commended, he is called the steward of unrighteousness. And this is quite wrongly translated as unjust steward or unrighteous steward. In the parable, the steward is never called the unjust steward. In the Greek version, after his action, he is called oikomonos tes adikias, and this means the steward of unrighteousness. And this is followed in the next verse by the phrase, Mammona tes adikias, which means the mammon of unrighteousness. He has become a steward of the unrighteous world and is now referred to as faithful in the least. And Messiah says that unless a man learns to be faithful in the least, that is the mammon of unrighteousness, he can't expect to be faithful in the true riches. A man must learn all he can from life and know all he can know of the knowledge and truth belonging to life before he can safely go on to higher truth and higher knowledge. This is the essential meaning of the parable and the comments, which were directed especially toward the disciples. If a man fails in his highest purpose, he must turn to what he can know and understand. This interpretation of the parable explains, in the first place, why the steward was merely told that he could no longer remain the steward of his rich lord. The accusation is not defined, and even a malicious accusation, and something that was mere hearsay, is suggested in the original Greek. It's plain from the parable that the steward had neither been taking money from the Lord's debtors, nor had he saved money for himself. The debtors owe very great amounts, and the steward had nothing. Let's now come to the parable itself. The parable is not about shrewd finance or sharp practice, and if it is taken from this point of view, the more it is studied, the more incomprehensible and confusing it becomes. The first comment about it, namely, but the children of this world, or world period, Ion, are wiser in their generation than the children of light, means that this world in its degree, or the men of this world period at their level of truth and knowledge and science, are far more intelligent and practical and industrious than the children of light in their degree or at their level of knowledge and truth. That is, there's a great deal to be learned from this world and its truth and knowledge and, in general, its science. The steward can no longer remain a child of the light. He can no longer be a steward of the true riches, of the truth which Messiah spoke of. He has come up against a barrier, and he cannot go on. Perhaps he has been told this, as it is said in the parable, or perhaps he has begun to know it for himself, since he makes no complaint when he is told he has failed. But instead of despairing, he tries to form a plan and eventually exclaims, I am resolved what to do, which is in the Greek, egnon ti poieso. It implies rather that an idea struck him suddenly, or that he suddenly saw what was possible, not from what he had known already, but from what he now saw in the situation in which he found himself. Up to then, he has perhaps regarded the world as of no importance, but now he turns toward it. If he had ceased to be able to progress along the path of return which he had followed, it still remained open to him to make the most of what lay behind him. But he has to readjust his ideas and also his attitude. This is shown in the action he takes. This is the plan that he resolves upon. He makes the world seem to be better than it is in order to return to it and gain from it what he can in order to live, but still as a steward. He becomes a steward of unrighteousness, of the world and its knowledge, while retaining all that he, as a steward of the true riches, has learned, and by applying what he knows already to all that he can learn from the knowledge existing in the world, he can keep alive in himself. For by the term steward, oikonomos, we must understand a man who has reached a responsible state of mind, a certain development of understanding. He decided to be faithful in the least, elakisto, and for this he is commended. And not only so, but it is implied that by being faithful to the mammon of unrighteousness, that is to the least, and to what is not his own, a man prepares himself to be faithful to what are the true riches, and what is his own. But in doing this, the steward does not serve mammon, but makes friends to himself out of mammon. Philos, ektu, mammona, tes adikias. That is, he makes use of mammon. To serve mammon is one thing, and Messiah says no man can serve Elohim and mammon. But to make use of mammon, to make use of the world and its discoveries and its knowledge, which are its riches, is not the same as being of mammon and serving the world and its truth, in the sense of taking it all as the only truth and knowledge. Messiah's advice to his disciples in this connection has puzzled many readers because of the misleading translation. In the verse containing the passage, "Make to yourself friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations," or eternal tabernacles, the phrase everlasting habitations or eternal tabernacles is incorrectly translated. In the previous verse, that is 8, the phrase the children of this world occurs, and here the word for world is aion in the Greek, which has different meanings and is rendered in many different ways in the Gospels. Here it means world period, or time period, or age, or eon. The same word as an adjective, aionios, appears in the next verse, but translated as eternal, that is, eternal tabernacles or habitations, implying at once some higher significance which is impossible in the view of the context. The phrase, literally, the children of this aeon, refers on directly to their aeonian habitations in the next verse, and the rendering should be the children of this time period, and the habitations of this time period. And by habitations, literally, tents, skani, even skins, is meant what this world period, or human age, regards as established or settled, which it thinks is truth, and so esteems and believes in, and so inhabits. The general sense of the verse, therefore, is not contradictory, as would appear from the customary translation, but means that the steward makes use of his time period and is able to make a place for himself in it and use its truth and all that belongs to it. In the parable, the debtors, kriopheletes, represents the world, man in his ordinary state, not having come to himself, and not aware that his real meaning is not found only in external life and its aims, is regarded in the Gospels as a debtor. Throughout the parable of the unjust steward and the commentary on it runs the idea of the two orders of truth, one that refers to a man's inner evolution and development so that he eventually comes into his own, and the other which refers to external life and everything that is not a man's own. Seen from below, there is a gulf between them, and the gulf is mentioned in the parable of Lazarus, which follows this parable. That is Luke 16:19 through 31. It is impossible to pass from worldly truth and science to the truth of which Messiah spoke, because what is lower in scale cannot comprehend what is above it. But higher truth can comprehend lower truth and use it, so that the steward's action is understandable. Everyone who remains in ignorance of the idea of higher truth is regarded in the Gospels as a debtor. And although higher truth has always been sown into the world and people have read it, they don't understand it. And for this reason, in the following parable of Lazarus, Messiah says that even if a man were to rise from the dead, people wouldn't repent. That is, undergo any transformation of mind. Luke 16:31. Neither will they be persuaded though one rise from the dead. Men are regarded as debtors in relation to higher truth, that is, to a higher possibility in them. If a man remains inferior to himself, he owes to himself, and so is a debtor to himself. If, for example, a man knows better but acts worse, he owes himself. That is, he is in debt to his better nature and his better understanding. This makes everyone unhappy, because most people feel this about themselves, only they don't really know where they owe, or about what they are in debt to themselves. But from the standpoint of the Gospels, where it is taught that a man must undergo an inner evolution beginning with metanoia, Messiah and ending in rebirth and the kingdom of heaven, everyone without exception is regarded as a debtor. There are many parables about owing, one of which compares a man to a debtor who owes millions. In the Lord's Prayer, the second request is to forgive one's debts. That is, in the literal Greek, chafenoi, to have all that one owes canceled, completely written off, which is the real meaning of forgiveness. The steward cannot cancel the debts of his Lord's debtors, for that would mean to pretend that the world is righteous and owes nothing, and is the same as the kingdom of heaven. But he writes them down for himself, in his own mind. He remits part of what they owe, that is, he makes it appear that they are, that is, the debtors, namely life, owe less than they do. In this way, he bridges the gulf between the true riches of knowledge and the world. He is not shaken by his apparent dismissal, nor is his attitude to the true riches changed. There is still an opportunity for him, and he uses it. He remains a faithful steward, but now he turns his knowledge toward the world, the unrighteous world, and so becomes a steward of unrighteousness. And to do this, he deliberately sees life as owing less than it does. That is, as better than it is, and people as better than they are. And he uses the knowledge existing in the world in the light of his own knowledge gained as a steward of the righteous world, or the true riches. He makes use of the mammon of unrighteousness, and for this he is commended by Messiah. But the Pharisees are made to misunderstand completely Messiah's comments and believe he's speaking simply of worldly wealth and think that all that has been said refers to literal riches, namely money. And the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all these things, and they scoffed at him. Luke 16:14. End of part 10. The Mark.